We will we'll start in just a minute.
Well, that was harder than it should have been. I know.
We did it. Okay, we have a lot of people that are coming in, so let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome, teachers, students, and many EF staffers. We are glad you've decided to join us virtually for this exciting event today in celebration of Veterans Day with our very special guest, World War II Marine veteran Warren Musch. My name is Darby Jones, and I oversee educational partnerships for EF Explore America, and I'm joined today by my colleague Sarah Shaban, who oversees loyalty and works closely with teachers from around the country. Sarah will be moderating the event today as we engage in conversation with Warren and are truly honored by his presence with us today. In advance, a huge thank you to you, Warren, for your service to this country and sharing your story with teachers and students far and wide. We are thrilled to be in an exclusive partnership with the Honor Flight Network that has afforded this opportunity. A quick reminder for everybody at home, although we can't see you, or in classrooms we can't see you, but please submit any questions you might have into that Q&A feature during our time together, and Sarah will be keeping an eye on that in case we have time to go through some of those questions at the end. You'll also want to turn your screen onto speaker view to focus on who's speaking. So with that said, Sarah, I will turn this over to you and to Warren.
Thank you, Darby. Welcome, and Warren, thank you so much for being here. We're so excited to have this opportunity, and especially this week ahead of Veterans Day. Thank you for your service. So what I would love to do is just ask you a few questions so we can get to know you and your story. And to start, I would love if you could just give us an introduction about yourself, you know, where you are, where you live, any highlights from your personal life that you want to share so we have some context about, you know, who it is we're talking to.
Okay. In other words, right now I'm living in Concordia Village, which is a Lutheran senior service facility, living independent living where I have my own apartment. And of course, now we're locked down, can't go to community dining anymore due to the virus. Little brief rundown on my life. I was born on a farm south of Virginia, Illinois, October 25th, 1921. So I just recently celebrated my 99th birthday. Amazing. And I attended a one-room country school, then Virginia High School, graduating in 1939. I entered Illinois College in September of 1939. I enlisted in the Marine Corps Reserve near the end of my junior year at Illinois College. I graduated from IC in May of 1943 and reported to boot camp at the U.S. Marine Corps Recruit Depot, Parris Island, South Carolina, on May the 18th, 1943. Following boot camp, I received orders to report to Marine Barracks, Quantico, Virginia, for Officers Candidate School. Upon graduating from OCS, I was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve and then attended Reserve Officers class. Upon that graduation, I was assigned to the headquarters, 3rd Battalion, 28th Marine, 5th Marine Division at Camp Pendleton, California. And I was to serve as a battalion combat intelligence officer. I was then ordered to Camp Ritchie, Maryland, Army Combat Intelligence Training for training, and then reported to the 5th Marine for active duty. In September, the division moved to Hawaii, the Big Island, to Camp Tarawa, where I trained for the invasion of Iwo Jima. While on Iwo Jima, I was promoted to first lieutenant and served as the occupation forces in Japan. I was released from active duty in June of 1946 and entered the inactive reserve. I was then promoted to captain in the reserve in September of 1949, finally discharged in December of 1957. I taught school for several years while still running the farm, which I oversaw at that particular time. Now my son Randall oversees the farming because I'm no longer able to go out and do anything connected with the farm. I married my hometown sweetheart Haroldine at Santa Margarita Ranch House Chapel in Camp Pendleton, California in 1943. We had two sons, Cordell, now deceased, and Randall, who lives here in Springfield. And my wife passed away in 2006 after 62 years of marriage. We had 5 grandchildren, and now, since she has passed away, we have 4 great-grandchildren in the family. That could conclude quick resume of my family.
Wow, that's amazing.
Now, where do you want? Pardon?
I said that's amazing. It seems like you've had an incredible life and your family, great grandchildren. It's amazing to see. Thank you. So that's a little bit about you. I would love to hear a little bit more about your service and your time in the Marine and specifically in Iwo Jima. Would love if you could kind of give us a brief view of maybe a day in the life as a Marine from your perspective. You know, what were some highlights, maybe some lowlights, and some, you know, things that you took away from that experience.
Well, you want me I could start with the landing on Iwo Jima on February the 19th, 1945, if that's where you'd like for me to start. Would that work?
Yeah, that would be great. It's a you know, a monumental moment.
Of course, we trained and finally boarded ship in early January of 1945. And then I lived aboard ship until we landed in February 19th, 1945 on Iwo Jima. I was in the 13th wave, and by that time, the beach was no place to be because the Japanese come out of their caves and manned their machine guns and so forth. Unusual situation. I made a dry foot landing, didn't get my shoe soles wet. The cops ran the LCVP right up on the beach. And I walked out, and there were 3 terraces on Iwo. You landed on the first one, then you went up the next one, and then the third one is up top, where you went out on the main part of the island. Well, I made it to the top of the third terrace and hit the deck. In Marine Corps language, it hits the ground, in other words. I landed between 2 Marines, both dead. I could touch one with either hand. I started to raise up, and I hesitated for some reason. And just as I hesitated, the machine gun knocked that ice in my face about 6 inches above my head. Had I raced on up, I wouldn't be here today. And then, of course, we went on to the main part of the island. And somehow or another, all 17 of the men in my section, myself, reached the point, a rendezvous point where we were supposed to meet. All got there without anybody getting even wounded or hurt in any manner wings. Then, of course, we were there for our job was to 28th Regiment of the 5th Marine Division was to take Mount Suribachi and make it secure so they could stop using it as a vantage point to shell us from their guns and positions on the northern part of the island. We were there for a few days. After Suribachi was secured, then we turned north and started moving north. Our position for the 5th Division was on the west side of the island in connection with the 3rd Division, with the 4th Division in the center and 3rd Division on the right. That was where we started operating. For the first few days, we had K rations, which were in a box about 2 inches wide and 6 inches long. That was a meal in itself. And that was all we had for the first about 3 or 4 days, because they were easily transported and easily contained and carried in our pack. We were given 3 or 4 of those, which meant we had 3 or 4 meals with us at all times. Then our duty was, of course, to move northward along in coordination with the other reserve units, or the other units that were there from the 4th and 3rd Divisions. And the good Lord was looking after me, because the first occasion was when I didn't raise that machine gun, missed me. Next time, while we were in combat, I went from command post to command post, moving target, and for some reason or other, the Japanese snipers didn't pick me off. In fact, one time I was in the front lines visiting with the platoon leader, took his observation post, looked around for a few moments, and pretty soon I decided it was time for me to move on to finish my job of collecting information and taking it back to the colonel. Well, I stepped down, and this fellow took my place, and he no more than got in his place, and the sniper got him right between the eyes. He brushed me as he went down. So a matter of a few seconds, it's been me instead of him. Another mystery guard looking after me, I'm sure. And then, of course, we moved up. We were in combat 2 to 3 days, 2 days primarily, and then we were out for reply and replacements for the next period of time. And then we kept moving up the west side of the island. And Colonel, I can't think of his name now, it escapes me. Oh, well, anyway, our battalion commander was so distraught with losing so many men that he got battle fatigue and removed from command of the battalion. The exec took over Major Smoke, and they tried to go across this valley several times. Couldn't make it, and finally did get across when they brought in armored bulldozers, and they created enough of a road that the tanks could, flamethrower tanks could navigate across the valley and burn out the Japanese in their pillar boxes and entrenchments on the other side of the valley. Then we moved on, of course, through that time. One of the important things, kind of humorous, I guess you'd say, about halfway through the operation, Colonel said, "Musch, aren't you going to shave?" I said, "Well, I'm not very superstitious, but so-and-so, I can't remember the lieutenant's name. He shaved yesterday and today he's not with us." So the colonel turned around, walked away, and said no more. So when the battle was over, I had 36-day growth of beard. Also, I might imagine, you can see me or not, but the top I'm wearing here anymore. The top jacket still fits fine. So anyway, that's a brief rundown on that. Anyway, it was quite a grueling affair, and after we got to where we were in combat for 3 days and out for 1 to rest, we got what was called 10-in-1 rations. In other words, there were enough rations in the container for 10 men for 1 day. And there were places where they're called sulfur islands, and there were fissures, I guess you call them, where the vapor came out and warm, and you set in when we were back in area reserved to get replacements and resupplied, we could set the can over one of those fissures, and the heat from that would warm it, so we could have warm meals. At least this took place maybe 1 out of 4 days. So at least we got a chance to lick our wounds, so to speak, and get resupplied with men and supplies. My battalion hit the beach with 932 men. We got 150 replacements, and 332 of us walked off. My battalion had 70% casualties, so that means 7 out of 10 were either killed or wounded. Only 3 survived without a scratch, and I, thanks to the good Lord, were one of those 3. So that pretty well runs down. Unless you have some questions now, that'd lead me on.
So I'm wondering, so you've had such an incredible experience, and clearly you were very lucky, and not the same can be said about a lot of the men that you were with. And I'm curious, actually, before enlisting and knowing maybe what to expect of war or not, what was your motivation for enlisting? What made you want to be a part of this?
Well, I guess why was I want to be a part of the military service, defending our country. And in other words, it all boils down to the point that we wanted to win, so we didn't have to speak Japanese or German. With the fact, the people in the eastern sector were, fighting the Germans in that connected area, and we were in the western Pacific fighting the Japanese, who had bombed Pearl Harbor on December the 7th, and to start the war. And, it seemed like, at least that time, my mind was to, since I was going to go into service, either drafted or make my choice. So due to a friend of mine that I met at Illinois College, who had already gone to platoon leader's class during the summer and had his commission as a second lieutenant, I guess through his influence probably, as I decided to choose the Marine Corps as my choice. I almost didn't get in the Marine Corps because I went to St. Louis with two other fellows to enlist. Well, the Navy doctor walked around me about 3 times, said, "Son, you have awful flat feet." Finally said, "Okay," and let me in. Well, the end result of all of that is, all during the service, I never had blister one or anything else, anything wrong with my feet. I outwalked me, a person who supposedly had good feet. I saw people take off their shoes that had bloody socks, blisters, and then bled. Me, I never had one problem, one blister the whole time I was there. So I was very blessed and fortunate in that respect too. I've never had any foot trouble all my life, and I guess that was, even though I have flat feet, I've outwalked many guys with supposedly good feet. That's another interesting fact.
Would you look at that? Now, I'm curious too. So you obviously joined and then went through a number of different ranks and titles, and you served as an intelligence officer, you said. What exactly does that entail? What was your objective when you were, on Iwo Jima as an intelligence officer?
I didn't quite understand what you meant, but what you said, that's hard for me to understand. Can you say it again?
I'll clarify. So in your role as an intelligence officer, when you were on Iwo Jima, what was your job?
My job was combat intelligence officer, and my duty to, get any information we could regarding the situation and report it to the colonel. And in the end, the operations officer usually writes a report on the report of the battle, but it fell to my job because apparently myself and my men, primarily my clerks, had very good notes, and from that I wrote the battle report from the 3rd Battalion, 28th Regiment, which was a little unusual. The operation officer usually does it, but the major wanted me to do it, and I did it. And I had the bound the bound copy of it, but somewhere in moving it got lost, unfortunately. So I don't have that anymore.
Thank you for that.
Any other questions?
Yeah, actually, I'm curious. So you mentioned your family back home, and I'm sure there were friends as well. How did you guys stay in touch while you were away? Were you guys able to speak to one another?
For a long time, of course, for quite some time, wasn't any. Finally, they let us use V-mail or whatever it was. I think that was right. And then, my wife knew where I was by that time. And on March the 12th, the news had it that the island was secure. Well, we had quite a lot more casualties after that. And up by the time we left the island on March the 26th. Another thing that happened was not much publicized ever, I don't think, was the night of the 25th, up until the morning of the 26th, about 300 Japanese came out of their caves, came down the west side of the island, and moved inland through the Army group that were coming in to take our occupation duty, plus the Marine pioneers. And those commanding officers had them turn in all their ammunition. So when the Japs came through their areas, all they had was their rifles, empty rifles, to try to ward off the Japs. And prior to that, and that day before, several new P-51 pilots came in with their planes with the idea, they were to support and escort the B-29s to Japan. Well, they thought the place was secure, so the Japanese came in and killed 3 or 4 of the pilots in their bed, sack, so to speak. And one who was wounded was able to get his 45 and kill several of the Japs who were trying to come in his tent. So that event took place, and I don't think it was ever publicized because I never did read about it any place particular until many years afterwards. So that was what happened. And the next morning, we marched down in unison and had the memorial service at the 5th Division Cemetery at that time. And then we marched aboard ship. And the ship we boarded was the USS Herald of the Morning. It had been out of the States for 24 months, never back for resupplies or anything. So we got aboard, we had dehydrated foods of all kinds, but at least it was a hot meal and was very welcome. And we got to take a shower and clean up. And in that case, our quarters were on the aft part of the ship, that's the back part of the ship. And one side was the Navy crew and the other side was the Marines. Well, after we go to sleep, they'd turn the vent off so that we had no air circulating in our quarters. I put with that one night, and then I went up in the forward hold and slept with my man up there. It was nice, pleasant surroundings, and plenty of room. So that's where I stayed. And of course, then we went back to our base camp in Camp Ritchie in the Big Island of Hawaii and started preparing for our invasion of the homeland of Japan. Well, Major Smoke took over command of our battalion, and he came down one day and he says, "Look here, Musch, I don't like what you're doing." And he proceeded to tell me what he didn't like. And after he left, I said, when he got ready to leave, I said, "Yes, sir," and went right on my same path. Well, then, as it happens, scuttlebutt travels wildly in the service. And I hear, they said, "Well, I hear, Musch, you're going to be a machine gun platoon leader." Well, that was the worst duty you could get in the Marine Corps infantry outfit. And then I've heard, well, Colonel Roll like what we up in division headquarters, like what you did on Iwo. So don't worry, he'll take care of you. Colonel above a major. Oh, that's good. So the next thing I know, I get a notice to report to regimental headquarters to run the conference room for the upcoming invasion of the homeland of Japan. I didn't have enough rank as a first lieutenant, which I'd been promoted to while I was there, didn't know it at the time. So the captain went and got the material, turned it over to me. Then when Colonel Liverstead, which is a regimental CO, called any subordinate officers for briefing and up to date on what we knew, well, I was up there telling them what had been planned and maps and everything I had plotted on the chalkboard and all to show it all. And so I was up there talking to many, many people much senior in order and rank than myself. I was first lieutenant, and the rest of them were all, captains, majors, or colonels. And so I was briefing them. And so then, eventually, thank goodness, atomic bombs were dropped, and Japan had basically surrendered artificially on August the 14th of 45. Then, of course, we got orders to go to Japan for an occupation duty. And we didn't know what to expect particularly, but we landed at Sasebo and no resistance at all. The Japanese cooperated quite well. In fact, if they didn't cooperate, all you had to do was tell them you report them to MacArthur headquarters, and chop, the mission was accomplished. And of course, I was there. And the division came home for Christmas of 1945. But I liked one point, because I had no Purple Heart or anything like that. So I liked one point of coming home. So at that point, I was transferred to the 2nd Marine Division, regimental headquarters, as assistant regimental person in the combat intelligence section. And I served in that position, and we went from Sasebo up to Fukuoka. And then orders came through, and I was changed from assistant R2, regimental combat intelligence officer, to the main officer for the 6th Marine, 2nd Marine Division. And then I was in that position for probably a week or so, and all of a sudden I get orders to join the group that was going home due to high pointers. Well, as it turned out, to get aboard ship, I got the job of building officer. The guys had come up I'd send them down the hole. I had 3 NCOs to help me. Well, they'd go down the hole and somebody put their sea bag in one sack or bed, and they'd get in the other, and the other guy go down and say, well, there's no room. Well, I knew how many supposed to be go down there, and so I knew they had to have a place. So it finally got that straightened out. And as the first lieutenant, I was second in command of the troops aboard the whole ship. And luckily at that time, the gun crew for the Navy on board the ship, of course, were all gone. So our quarters were up there where those guys used to be. So we had I had very nice quarters coming back. And during that, I had quite an experience. We ran into rough weather and foghorns were blowing and everything. And I didn't realize it at the time. I wasn't really concerned or art at all, but everything loose in the wardroom. We were sliding across the deck from one side to the other. And the ship took a 26-degree roll, and 28 degrees was the maximum before it capsized. But at the time, I didn't know, so I just, well, I didn't. And so I wasn't a bit scared, but I should have been, I guess.
Wow.
And of course, then we got, yes, go ahead.
I was just saying, wow, that's quite scary. And actually, it's a good segue because there was a question from one of the attendees in terms of, it sounds like there's obviously a lot of moments in your experience, both when you're on Iwo Jima and it sounds like after as well, that were scary or frightening. And this person who asked the question wanted to know, like, was there any moment in particular that stands out as, the scariest time you had there or the most challenging maybe?
Hey, say that again. I didn't quite follow all of it. I'm sorry, I don't hear you clearly.
No problem. So someone asked a question. They were wondering what was maybe one of the scariest moments or most challenging moments that you had while you were there.
I still didn't. I'm sorry.
Scariest moments you had there.
Scariest moments I had what?
Scariest moments you had in battle.
Oh, I suppose I don't know quite how to to explain it. But I guess when I first landed and could have touched the dead Marine on either side of where I landed. I landed right between the two. They had camouflage on their face, and that's when it hit me, this is for real. And up until that time, I didn't think anything about it. But looking over my shoulder, the other LCVs were still coming in, and one came in, and just as the ramp went down, a mortar shell hit right amidst all the men. So, several of those people never even got off the beach, hardly. And it was how myself and my men made it all with nobody getting killed or wounded. A couple of my men had minor shrapnel wounds, but bandaged them up and they stayed. So I had my full section there the whole time I was there.
Thank you.
And
so we actually
any other questions?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So I was wondering what, we have a lot of students on the call, and I'm curious, what are some important lessons that you might have learned from being a Marine that they can, take away from your experience?
I don't know. I can't explain it. But, after the initial shock of the first 2 days or 3, whatever it was, I can't remember for sure. I was able to go about my job just like I would anything else. I had no fear of getting killed, wounded, or anything else. I did my job, and and by being a moving target, it's still a mystery to me how they didn't pick me off. The only thing I can figure out is the Lord had an angel on each shoulder watching out for me. Now, I don't, that's my only solution. But how could I do what I did and not be scared? I went about the job just like I would anything else. I wasn't the least bit scared of getting wounded or killed. That help you out?
They were looking out for you. I do have another question too. Someone had asked, you spent, all this time on the island, and you obviously probably grow very close to the people that you serve with. Did you have any friends that you made while you guys were on the island, or people that you're now close to through the Marines?
No, I didn't have any close, since I was an individual section of my own. I didn't have any close buddies. In other words, I was the commanding officer of my section, and we worked independently. And our job was to, with my men, to train all the people we could in map reading and in reporting intelligence to the colonel. In fact, the colonel called me in at one time. I forgot to mention this. It says, "Hey, Musch, you got too many men in your section." I said, "All right, Colonel. Since my main men are trained in radio operations and reporting, how about if I put one of my trained men with each one of your company commanders?" He said, "Okay, we'll give it a try." And it worked beautifully, because when the company commander was busy and he got a call from headquarters, that my man could answer the phone and take the message or relay it to the captain or whoever was in charge of the company. And it really worked beautifully. So that was something I figured out on my own. I don't know how I did it. In fact, another thing that I might add, since there's several men in my section had combat intelligence, they were former raiders or former paratroopers who were disbanded to join the nucleus of the 5th Division with combat trained troops. And because of that, I decided right on, who am I, a greenhorn, going to tell these people what to do? I said, they're going to train me. I looked out for them. They looked out for me. In fact, at that time, I neither smoked nor drank, either one, anything. And so I had when we were in base camp, I got a beer ration every month. Well, I gave it to my men, and then I said, we lived in tents in Hawaii. And I said to my men, I said, you put that under the floor in your tent so the headquarters company commander and any of his staff doesn't know you have it. And when you open it, drink it on the sly, not when somebody can see what you're doing. And another thing that happened, Turner was my section chief, wonderful guy. He was a former paratrooper. And I had one fellow that was in the Raiders. He'd had 3 operations before Iwo Jima. And I didn't know that till his son called me after he died. See, I kept contact with a lot of these fellows after we got home and for years afterwards. In fact, I had one fellow that was in my section who I transferred to the company. Ralph Sharp was his name. Well, a few years after I got home, I got a call one night about midnight, and he was on the phone. He says, "Thank you for saving me." And he was all liquored up, could hardly understand what he said. But what happened, toward the end of the battle, his orders came through to be court-martialed. And when they got in my hands, they disappeared. Nobody traced it any further. So I saved his neck.
Wow. I'd be grateful.
So that's quite an unusual situation. I got by with it. If I'd have been caught, it would have been all day for me. But
I'm
nobody.
glad you didn't get caught for the both of you.
Pardon?
I'm glad you didn't get caught for both of your sakes.
Yeah, both of us for that matter, yes.
Yeah.
It's
So
been
there's
wonderful. Been wonderful relating my story to you. If you have any more questions, I'll try and answer them.
Yeah, there is actually is one more question. So someone asked, after you finished your duty and returned home, how did the military take care of you for your service?
How did the military what?
Take care of you.
Well, didn't really enter into it much at all. In other words, like most World War II people, you came home and went to your job, whatever it might have been that you left or might have been coming approached. Well, you see, in my case, I went to college, which I hadn't returned, because I didn't think I wanted anything to do with farming. Because when I was in high school, I got up in the morning and milked 4 or 5 old cows, and then I fed them, milked them at night and fed them, whether it was cold, hot, or whatever. I decided I didn't want anything to do with farming. So I went to college, majored in chemistry with a minor in math. In writing back and forth with folks, I suddenly decided, gee, I don't think I want to be cooped up in a research lab for 8 hours a day. So I chose, my dad offered me partnership in farming, so I accepted it and liked what I did all my life.
Wow, that's incredible. So actually someone had asked, so you said in your, sorry, so one of the questions was, what leadership lessons did you take and impart back in your career and then as a teacher after serving?
Well, I missed some part of your question. What would you say?
Well, what about leadership? Being in the Marines helped you become with your teaching and.
Oh, yes. In other words, by being in the Marines, learning to take orders before I gave orders, and to, I guess I don't know quite how to explain it, but anyway.
Eloquent in what you're doing. To get your point across.
Yeah, get my point across. Anyway, I turned out to be, I guess, a leader in lots of ways, because I came home, and that Sunday, first day I was home, I went to my local church. It was annual meeting time at that time in April of 1946. And they needed a member for the session, which is the governing body of the Presbyterian Church. And somebody nominated me to be on the session, not even knowing what entailed or anything else. But I learned, and I don't know why, but they elected me clerk of session. So I wrote longhand in a big book, because at that time we didn't have typewriters or loose leaf books to put stuff in, And so I had that position for I don't know how many years. And then finally they passed a rule that you could only serve so many years, then you had to lay out a year. Well, I stayed with that, and then eventually, I think in the late 90s, I can't remember the exact date. Do you remember when Uncle Dick Wilson died? Uncle Dick Wilson, we call him, was treasurer of the church for 41 years. Well, I guess a few months before he passed away with a heart attack, he called me in and brought me up to date on what was going on with the church and where his records were and all, what I needed to know if somebody took over. Then he suddenly died of a heart attack, and all of a sudden I was treasurer of the church, which job I held for 23 years. At that time, I did all longhand, a sheet with 35 columns on it. And of course, the vertical had to equal horizontal, or I worked till I found a penny mistake, if that's what it was. And then, of course, I was active on the session sometime after that. And I guess a few years ago, I finally quit entirely as far as governing bodies of the church is concerned. So I think, looking back over, I think I was able to take leadership positions. Oh, that's another thing I forgot to mention in my life. I served 8 years on the Cass County Board of Commissioners. And I was the only, last year I was there, last 2 years I was on there. I was the only Republican out of 11 members. The other 10 were all Democrats. But the way it's supposed to work, as soon as the election was over, everybody worked for the good of the county. And when I said I was going to retire, the chairman of the Democratic Party came and begged me to stay on the county board, which I thought was a tremendous compliment.
It is a high compliment.
I guess that pretty well winds up. Unless you have some more questions, I'll try to answer.
So 2 more questions, actually, or maybe one if we have time. So I'm curious, do you have any advice for young people all over the country? There's a lot of students on the call, and it'd be great to know what advice you have for the youth of America.
I have to.
Do you have any advice for the children on the call, for the students on the call? What's your advice?
Have any advice? What?
Your advice to the students who are on the call.
Well, the students, the main thing is, I guess I would offer to the students is study history. Don't, because it always comes back to the point, if you don't study history and know what took place, you're doomed to make the same mistakes again. So be careful what you listen to and get the other side of the story so you can make an educated choice for your life. How's that?
Great. It's extremely important. Now, Darby, do we have time for more questions, or one more question? All right, this will be the last one. So, sorry, I'm just reading these.
What?
It's hard. Let me leave you with this question. So someone had asked, being married for 61 years, what's been the key to a happy relationship in your life?
I missed it.
What's the key to a happy
Key to a
marriage?
happy marriage for 62 years and mother.
Well, we worked as a team, and I don't know quite how it all worked out, but we got along marvelously well together. My father-in-law, which is my wife's father, said, "Don't ever go to bed mad at each other," which we never did. We had disagreements, of course. It's not all smooth, without bumps along the road. But we had a very, very good marriage. I would say exceptional. Because we were, open with each other. And when we had dinner with the boys at night, when they got older, anything they brought up was fair game. In other words, no matter what they wanted to talk about, we were willing to listen. And they soon found out that if they didn't like what I told them, when they used to go to Heralding, because they'd get the same answer there. If there was any difference, we said it afterward, because they weren't around. And it worked out beautifully, as you can attest to, Randall, I think. Anyway, I think that's all. In other words, we belong to a rich club of 9 couples. 8 couples came dressed up in your best bib and tucker, tie, coat, and all the works. And the other couple served the meal and so forth and didn't play. Well, I don't know. Observing the couples involved, I thought we had maybe not the best, but among the very best, there are a few that were like, seemed to get along like we did, but we could always see where other people were. In other words, one good friends of ours, they got tired of being cooped up. Well, that never did problem with us. In fact, both boys still traveled with us when they were in high school. Even last year, I think was last. So I thought that was quite complimentary that they would still be willing to travel with us when they were junior, seniors in high school.
That is a compliment for sure. Don't want to spend time with your parents when you're that age. So thank you, Warren. That's amazing. And it's incredible hearing not only your experience, but the rich life that you've had, even, outside of the military. It's a testament to you and everything that you've done. And we appreciate you being here and speaking with us and sharing your story. And we thank you for your service. We're extremely grateful and appreciative of everything that you've done. So thank you.
It was an honor to serve, and I'm glad I did. And by the grace of God, I'll have to repeat that again. I'm still here. After 99 years, I'm still able to put one foot ahead of the other. Not very fast or very secure, but I still move. So thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to share my experience with you. And your students, I suppose, are listening at this time. Are they?
Yes,
They are. Thank you.
Very good.
Well, thank you, Warren. Thank you for your service. And thank you, everyone at home, for joining us, and teachers and students. It's just been a great pleasure for us. And happy Veterans Day to all.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure to talk to you. I'm glad to share my story. As maybe I should have told earlier, I've traveled all over central Illinois, far south of St. Louis, Quincy on the west, and Decatur and so forth around in Springfield, where, of course, I now live. And giving my story. I don't know how many times I've done it. I started about the year 99 or 2000. A neighbor girl who was a senior said they were going to have school on Veterans Day. Would you come and talk to the student body? I'd never done it before. So I stood out in the middle of the gym floor and talked to the high school students. They turned all the grade school kids loose. I wish they'd left them there, but I wasn't running the show. So I stood out in the middle of the floor on the gym, talked for about 25 minutes, and you could have heard a pin drop the whole time I was there. And of course, that's been me. The biggest group I've talked to was Illinois Veterans Home in Quincy in 2011. I was a principal speaker and talked to about 460 people in the auditorium where they were. And then I was overwhelmed, I guess is the word. I stood there in line for 45 minutes for people coming up and thanking me for being there. And of course, when I give my talk, I use no notes just like today. It all comes from, my memory. So
That's
thanks
incredible.
again for having me on. I'd like to share my story with anybody that will listen. Also, I might add my complete life story is on the Abraham Lincoln Museum and Library website. 3 hours and 26 minutes of my complete life story. So if anybody wants to hear it again, from that standpoint, all they got to do is go to Abraham Lincoln Library and Museum.com, go to Veteran Stories, and go down to Warren Musch, and there I am. So thank you again for having me. I enjoy giving my story. I know a lot of people can't, but I might add that I don't think I mentioned that. Only twice after I got home did I have any problems. I had two times I had a nightmare. My wife had to wake me up. But other than that, I have no bad thoughts or feelings, even though all I went through. I still, didn't have any flashbacks except those 2 brief times.
Well, Warren, happy Veterans Day, and thank you again for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Okay, he's going to disconnect you.